People sometimes think about human evolution like a ladder, steady climb. From some ape, then a slightly more upright ape, then another one, then us. It's a clean line, each step higher than the last, each one turning into the next. That picture feels neat, it feels simple, but that's not how it really happened. Not at all. Our story is much messier. It's like a big, overgrown bush, or a very old, tangled tree. Lots of branches coming off. Some branches ended abruptly. Some kept going for a long time. Some branches split again and again, and sometimes different branches grew side by side. For millions of years, there wasn't just one path. There were many paths, many different kinds of human-like creatures living at the same time, walking on Earth, figuring things out just like we do. It was a complex, wild time. Where did this idea of a straight line come from? Well, it's an old way of thinking. When people first started finding fossils, they wanted to put things in order. They saw progress. They saw things getting smarter, getting more human. It made sense to them to line up the fossils from oldest to newest, smallest brain to biggest brain, bent over to straight up. It was a simple story, and simple stories are easy to tell. But the more we find, the more we learn, the harder it is to stick with that simple story. The evidence just doesn't fit. Think about the earliest days, long before anything we'd recognize as human. We're talking millions of years ago, the first creatures that started to look a bit different from other apes. They lived in Africa. We have fossils of things like Sahelanthropus, chidensis, Orrorin, and Ardipithecus. These are some of the oldest ones we know. They lived between 7 and 4 million years ago. Sahelanthropus, for example. We have a skull from Chad. It's really old, about 7 million years old. The skull has a mix of features. Some look like an ape. Some look more like a hominin, one of our early relatives. Its brain was small, like an ape's, but the way its spine connected to the skull might suggest it was starting to walk upright. Orrorin from Kenya is about 6 million years old. We have leg bones that also suggest it was walking on two legs. Ardipithecus from Ethiopia lived around 4.4 million years ago. We have a lot more of its skeleton. It definitely walked upright, but it also spent time in trees. Its feet were still good for grasping branches. These weren't just perfect stepping stones. Each one had its own unique blend of traits. They weren't just waiting to turn into the next thing. They were successful creatures in their own right. They lived for hundreds of thousands of years. They were adapting to their environment. And they weren't the only ones around. There were probably many other ape-like creatures that we haven't found yet. The fossil record is like a few scattered pages from a very long book. We're piecing together the story with what we have. And what we have shows early diversity, early branching, not a single line. Then came the Australopithecines. These are a big group. Lucy, the famous fossil, is an Australopithecus afarensis. She lived about 3.2 million years ago in Ethiopia. A. afarensis definitely walked upright. Their skeletons show that clearly, but they still had long arms and curved fingers good for climbing trees. They were successful. This species lived for almost 1 million years. That's a very long time for a species. It means they were good at what they did. They weren't just a quick transition to something else. They were a thriving branch of the hominin tree. But here's where the tangled mess really starts to show. A. afarensis wasn't the only Australopithecine. There was Australopithecus africanus living in South Africa around 3 to 2 million years ago, also walking upright. Then there was Australopithecus garhi in East Africa around 2.5 million years ago. Some evidence suggests A. garhi might have been using stone tools, which was a big deal. And Australopithecus sediba, found in South Africa, lived around 2 million years ago. It had a mix of primitive and more modern features. The important thing is this: many of these Australopithecine species lived at the same time. They weren't just one after the other. A. afarensis was around for a long time, and while it was thriving, other Australopithecines were also evolving and living. They were separate species, distinct from each other. They shared a common ancestor, sure, but they were different branches of that big bush. Some might have been our direct ancestors. Some might have been like our cousins who never led to us. We don't know for sure which ones are directly in our line and which are side branches. And that's okay. The point is, there were options. There was variety. And it gets even more complicated. There was a whole other group of robust hominins called Paranthropus. These are often called robust Australopithecines. They lived from about 2.7 to 1.2 million years ago, alongside the later Australopithecines and early Homo species. Or think of Paranthropus aethiopicus, Paranthropus boisei, and Paranthropus robustus. These Paranthropus species had huge teeth and powerful jaws. They had a sagittal crest on their skulls, like a mohawk of bone where strong chewing muscles attached. This suggests they ate a tough, fibrous diet. They were incredibly specialized when they were very successful for over 1 million years, but they were a dead end. They eventually died out. They didn't lead to us. They were a major side branch. They show very clearly that evolution wasn't just about moving towards us. It was about adapting to different niches, and sometimes those adaptations lead to extinction. This is a massive piece of the tangled mess. Different kinds of hominins built very differently, walking around at the same time. Now, let's talk about our own genus Homo. The first species we call Homo are generally placed around 2.8 to 2.5 million years ago. Homo habilis, handyman, is one of the earliest, found in East and South Africa. This species is often associated with the first simple stone tools, but even here, it's not a clean start. Some scientists debate if Homo habilis should even be in our genus. And there's another early Homo species, Homo rudolfensis, which some think is just a big H. habilis and others think is a distinct species. Again, complexity right at the beginning. 2 potential early Homo species, maybe more, living at the same time. It's not one thing smoothly transitioning into another, it's a busy landscape. Then came Homo erectus. This species appeared around 1.9 million years ago. And it was a game changer. Homo erectus was the first hominin to leave Africa. They spread across Asia. They lived for a very long time, over 1.5 million years. Some populations might have survived until as recently as 100,000 years ago in places like Java. They were incredibly successful. They had bigger brains than earlier hominins, used more advanced stone tools like hand axes, and likely controlled fire. Of Homo erectus was not just a step on the way to us. It was a dominant, widespread, and successful species for a vast period of Earth's history. For millions of years, if you talked about humans, you were probably talking about Homo erectus. We are related to them, yes. They are likely a direct ancestor of later Homo species, including us. But they were not a quick transition. They were an entire chapter of human history that lasted far longer than our own species has existed so far. They were one of the main branches of the bush, sending out new twigs. As Homo erectus spread and evolved, different populations started to change. This eventually led to new species. Around 700,000 to 200,000 years ago, we see species like Homo heidelbergensis in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Many scientists think Homo heidelbergensis was the common ancestor of Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, and Homo sapiens us in Africa. But even this is not perfectly clear-cut. The fossil record is spotty. It's hard to draw exact lines. It was a time of more branching and diversification, and then we get to the really fascinating part of the tangled mess. The time when multiple different human species were not just evolving, but living at the same time. Side by side, on the same planet. Take the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. They lived in Europe and parts of Asia from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They were incredibly adapted to cold climates. They were strong, built powerfully, with large brains, sometimes even bigger than ours. They made sophisticated tools, hunted large game, buried their dead, and possibly even had symbolic thought. They were not some primitive ancestor that slowly turned into us. They were a distinct species. A separate branch of the Homo family tree, and for tens of thousands of years, they lived alongside our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. And not just alongside. They met, they interacted, and we know for sure they interbred. Thanks to genetics, we know that most people today, outside of Africa, have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genome. This means that at some point, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals had children together. Those children survived and passed on their genes. This is huge. It absolutely shatters the idea of a straight, pure line of human evolution. Our lineage is mixed. It's not just one path, it's a braiding of paths. But it doesn't stop with Neanderthals. The Denisovans are another amazing part of the story. We know about them mostly from their DNA. We have very few fossil remains, a finger bone, a few teeth, a piece of a skull from a cave in Siberia. But their DNA tells us they were a distinct group, separate from both Neanderthals and us. They also interbred with Homo sapiens. People in parts of Asia, especially Southeast Asia and Oceania, carry Denisovan DNA. So, here's another distinct branch of the human family tree that mixed with ours. Imagine that world. Imagine what it was like. You're a Homo sapiens living in Europe or Asia 50,000 years ago. And you might meet a Neanderthal or a Denisovan. You might trade with them. You might fight them. You might even fall in love and have children with them. It was a world of multiple human species, each with their own ways of life, their own strengths, their own adaptations. It was a profoundly diverse human world. We were just the lone survivors of that bustling era. And the tangled mess keeps growing with new discoveries. Take Homo floresiensis, the hobbits from the island of Flores in Indonesia. Discovered in 2003, these small-bodied, small-brained hominins lived until about 50,000 years ago. They were only about 3.5 feet tall. Their brains were tiny, like an Australopithecus. But they made stone tools and hunted. How did they get there? The leading idea is that they descended from an early population of Homo erectus that got isolated on the island. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they underwent island dwarfism, evolving to be much smaller. Homo floresiensis is a perfect example of a major side branch. They weren't a direct ancestor or a step. They were a unique evolutionary experiment adapting to a very specific environment. And they lived at the same time as Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. 4 more different human species on different parts of the planet living concurrently. That's a busy family reunion. And then there's Homo naledi, discovered in a cave system in South Africa in 2013. This species is truly astonishing. It has a mix of very primitive features, like its small brain size, similar to Australopithecus, and its curved fingers good for climbing. But it also has very modern features, like its feet adapted for long-distance walking and its human-like teeth. What's more, Homo naledi was found in a deep, difficult-to-reach chamber, suggesting they might have deliberately placed their dead there. This kind of symbolic behavior was previously only attributed to species with much larger brains, like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Homo naledi lived surprisingly recently, between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. This means they were alive at the same time as early Homo sapiens in Africa and Homo heidelbergensis and the ancestors of Neanderthals. They were another unique branch, with their own set of adaptations and perhaps even behaviors that challenge our ideas of what a primitive hominin could do. They weren't a stepping stone to us, they were just another successful, thriving branch of the human family tree that eventually died out. So, the fossil record gives us a clear picture of a tangled mess, but genetics also strongly supports this view. Our DNA tells us stories about our past that fossils sometimes can't. The interbreeding with Neanderthals and Denisovans is a prime example. It shows gene flow between distinct species. It shows that the lines were not clean. They were porous. Genetics also tells us about population bottlenecks. Our human ancestors went through periods where their populations crashed, sometimes to very small numbers. This means our journey wasn't a steady increase in numbers or a smooth progression. It was a struggle for survival, with close calls. We are the descendants of those who made it through those tough times. And think about human diversity today. We see people with different skin colors, hair types, body builds, and disease resistances. This diversity didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's the result of different populations of Homo sapiens adapting to different environments as they migrated out of Africa and across the globe. It's a living testament to evolution in action, but it also reflects a history of branching and adaptation within our own species, not a uniform progression. What about key evolutionary concepts? How do they fit into this tangled picture? Speciation is the process by which new species arise. It often happens when populations get separated, maybe by a mountain range or a body of water, and they evolve differently over time. This is exactly what we see with the various hominin species. Different groups evolving in different places, leading to the creation of distinct species like Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo floresiensis. It's not one species smoothly morphing into the next. It's a branching event. Common ancestors are another important idea. We don't say that humans evolved from monkeys or apes. We say that humans and other apes like chimpanzees share a common ancestor. That ancestor was neither fully human nor fully chimpanzee. It was something else. And from that common ancestor, 2 different lineages branched off, evolving in different directions. The same idea applies within our own hominin family. We don't evolve from Australopithecus afarensis. We share a common ancestor with them. Maybe A. afarensis itself was an ancestor, but it wasn't the only one, and it didn't just directly become us without other paths diverging. Extinction is a massive part of the story. Most species that have ever lived are now extinct. This applies to hominins too. The vast majority of those branches on the human evolutionary bush ended. Sahelanthropus, Orrorin, Ardipithecus, all the Australopithecines, all the Paranthropus species, Homo erectus eventually, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi. All gone. We, Homo sapiens, are just one surviving twig on a very large, complex, and mostly extinct tree. Our survival is not a given. It's a result of chance, adaptation, and perhaps a bit of luck. Mosaic evolution is another concept that highlights the messiness. This means that different traits evolve at different rates. For example, bipedalism, walking on two legs, evolved very early in hominin history, millions of years before big brains became common. The early Australopithecines were walking upright, but their brains were still ape-sized. This shows that evolution isn't a package deal where everything changes at once. It's a piecemeal process. Some parts of the body adapt, while others stay more primitive or adapt in different ways. This creates a fascinating mix of features in many fossil species, making it hard to slot them into a simple primitive to advanced ladder. Adaptive radiation is when a group of organisms diversifies rapidly into many new forms, especially when they enter a new environment or face new challenges. The early hominins in Africa spreading into different habitats could be seen as an example of adaptive radiation. Different groups adapted to different food sources, different landscapes, leading to the variety of Australopithecines and Paranthropus. Then, when Homo erectus left Africa and spread across the vast continent of Asia, its populations also diversified and adapted to many different environments, eventually leading to new species. So, why is the tangled mess a better picture? It's better because it's true. It's a more accurate reflection of the evidence we have. It respects the complexity of life and the unpredictable nature of evolution. It shows that evolution is not a directed path towards some perfect form or towards us. It's a series of experiments, adaptations, successes, and failures. It also highlights our unique place. We, Homo sapiens, are the only human species left. That's actually quite unusual. For most of the past few million years, there were multiple human species walking the Earth. Our current state of being the sole species is an anomaly. We are the product of all that branching and intermingling. Our very genes carry the echoes of those past interactions. We are the embodiment of that tangled mess. The story of our origins is far richer, far more interesting, and far more awe-inspiring when we accept its true complexity. It's not a simple upward march. It's a story of different kinds of human-like creatures living and dying, adapting and failing, interacting and interbreeding. It's a story of multiple attempts by nature to make a bipedal, big-brained creature. And ours is just the one that happened to survive and thrive. When you look at that old image, the one that shows the ape slowly straightening up to become a modern human, understand that it's just a cartoon. A simplification that misses the whole point. The reality is a vast ancient forest with many paths leading in many directions. Some paths go deep into the forest and then stop. Some wind around and merge with others. And ours is just one of those paths, not necessarily the best, not necessarily the most important, but simply the one that kept going. It's a messy story, but it's our messy story, and it's a true one.